Adolf Hitler was a fanatical leader, a megalomaniac who led his country and many others into the abyss.
This isn't a story from fiction. This was life, every single day, in Nazi Germany. A world where even your thoughts could betray you, where a wrong word, a hidden book, or a quiet prayer could mean death.
So you have committees of students meeting with professors together, deciding what categories of books in these university libraries would count as un-German.
Children pledged loyalty to a man they barely understood. Neighbors became informants. The radios echoed only one voice. Everything, from the way you dressed to the way you smiled, had to align with the regime.
Everything, from the way you dressed to the way you smiled, had to align with the regime.
You didn't live freely. You lived cautiously, carefully, silently. In a nation that mastered control through fear, obedience wasn't a choice. It was survival. So, what did everyday life really look like? Let's find out. Daily surveillance and fear. In Nazi Germany, fear didn't hide in the shadows. It lived out in the open. It lingered in conversations, eyes, and even silence. The Gestapo, Hitler's secret police, didn't need to watch everyone. They let the people do that themselves. Neighbors became informants. Friends stopped trusting each other. Even family members, especially children, were known to report their own parents. One careless comment, a joke, a complaint, a whisper, could mean imprisonment or worse. People learned to choose their words with precision, or say nothing at all. Homes, workplaces, churches, and schools were all part of a massive network of self-surveillance. You never really knew who was listening, so you assumed everyone was. The government didn't need cameras. It used fear as its surveillance system, and it worked. Citizens began to pre-censor their thoughts, reshaping their behavior to avoid standing out. The line between truth and safety became blurred. Nighttime was the most feared. Many arrests happened after dark. A knock on the door wasn't just a sound, it was a threat. Families waited in dread, hoping it passed them by. In this world, survival meant staying invisible, staying silent. In Nazi Germany, fear wasn't occasional, it was routine, and it shaped how people lived, every single day. The Hitler Youth Indoctrination. In Nazi Germany, childhood wasn't a time of innocence, it was a time of training. From as early as 10 years old, children were enrolled in the Hitler Youth or the League of German Girls, mandatory organizations designed to shape the next generation of loyal Nazis. Every week, after school, children marched in uniform, sang patriotic songs, and learned Nazi ideology by heart. They were taught that the Führer was their protector, their guide, almost a godlike figure. Lessons weren't just about history or language, they were about race, loyalty, and obedience. Jewish classmates slowly disappeared from schools. No one asked why. For boys, physical strength, endurance, and military drills became daily routines. Girls were taught homemaking, modesty, and racial purity. Their future, they were told, was to raise strong Aryan children for the Reich. The goal was clear: replace family loyalty with loyalty to the state. Children were encouraged to report anything suspicious at home, and many did. By the time they were teenagers, they weren't just students. They were soldiers of ideology, prepared to fight, inform, and sacrifice for a cause they never chose, but were conditioned to believe in every single day. The role of propaganda in daily life. In Nazi Germany, truth didn't come from facts. It came from a voice on the radio, a headline in the newspaper, or a slogan painted across a wall. Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, understood one thing very clearly: control the story, and you control the people. Every home was encouraged to own a Volksempfänger, the people's receiver. These cheap radios were designed to broadcast only state-approved content. No foreign stations, no outside voices, just Hitler's speeches, patriotic music, and messages that praised the regime. Newspapers followed the same rulebook. Every article, Every cartoon, every photograph passed through layers of censorship. Stories about victories at the front, the evil of Jews, and the greatness of the German race weren't just common. They were everywhere. In movie theaters, carefully crafted films played out the Nazi vision. Posters lined the streets with images of strength, unity, and loyalty. Even school books rewrote history to glorify the Führer. It wasn't just information, it was an immersion. From morning to night, Germans lived in a world built by propaganda. Over time, it became hard to tell what was real, and that confusion, that blurred line between truth and fiction, was exactly what the regime wanted. Book burnings and information control. In Nazi Germany, even words were dangerous. Books that challenged the regime's vision, whether they were political, philosophical, scientific, or simply written by Jewish authors, were labeled un-German. And they weren't just banned, they were burned. Across universities and city squares, massive public book burnings became spectacles of loyalty. Students, professors, and citizens were urged to toss corrupt literature into the flames. Titles by Einstein, Freud, Marx, and even novels and poetry were destroyed in the name of ideological purity.
So you have committees of students meeting with professors together, deciding what categories of books in these university libraries would count as un-German.
The message was clear. Only one version of reality was allowed, and it would be written by the Nazis. Censorship didn't end with fire. Libraries were purged. Bookstores were inspected. Even owning certain titles could raise suspicion. Intellectual freedom disappeared. Writers and thinkers either fled, conformed, or went silent. At home, people hid forbidden books like contraband. A single page, a cover peeking from a drawer, could be enough for arrest. Children were warned not to read anything not provided by the state, and many grew up never knowing there were other ways to think. By erasing ideas, the Nazis weren't just controlling the present, they were cutting people off from the past and shaping a future where only their words remained.
Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you.
The uniform culture and visual obedience. In Nazi Germany, conformity wasn't just expected, it was worn. Uniforms were everywhere. From soldiers to students, factory workers to schoolgirls, daily life was stitched with symbols of obedience. What you wore said who you were, what you believed, and where your loyalties lay. The brown shirts of the SA, the black-clad SS, and the youth in Hitler-Jugend attire all became part of the visual landscape.
But they had volunteered for service in the German army, and their primary goal was to fight communism.
Even civilians dressed according to unspoken rules. Too much individuality, too much color, or a non-Aryan style could draw dangerous attention. Fashion wasn't an expression, it was allegiance. Children in Hitler Youth uniforms marched through towns. Women wore modest, regulation-style clothing. Men kept haircuts sharp and suits plain. The regime wanted society to look unified, even before people thought the same. Visual obedience extended to badges, flags, and armbands. The swastika wasn't just a political symbol, it was a daily presence, printed on everything from banners to school supplies. Not wearing it could be seen as resistance. In a world built on visibility, standing out was dangerous. Blending in was survival. The uniform culture of Nazi Germany turned appearance into ideology until identity was no longer personal. It was programmed piece by piece into what people wore. The myth of the Aryan ideal. Every day in Nazi Germany, people were measured, literally and figuratively, against a myth. The Aryan ideal: tall, strong, blue-eyed, blonde, and purely German. It wasn't just a preference, it was a policy, and if you didn't fit in, life became harder in ways both obvious and invisible. Posters showed idealized faces, flawless, smiling, and powerful. Schools taught racial science, urging children to compare skull shapes and bloodlines. Even dating was monitored. Marriage with non-Aryans was discouraged, then forbidden by law. Love became a tool of the state. The regime promoted selective breeding through programs like Lebensborn, encouraging women with racially pure traits to have children for the Reich. Hospitals sometimes refused care to those deemed genetically inferior. Mental illness, disabilities, and even different facial features could mark someone as unfit. In films, advertisements, and textbooks, only the Aryan type was celebrated. The rest were erased, or worse, dehumanized. This obsession with racial purity wasn't just about exclusion. It was about engineering a nation that looked the way the regime imagined: perfect, obedient, superior. For millions, it meant living each day knowing their existence was unwelcome. Under the shadow of the Aryan myth, appearance became a matter of survival. Life for the non-Aryans. In Nazi Germany, if you weren't Aryan, life became a daily battle against humiliation, isolation, and fear. For Jews, Roma, disabled individuals, and others deemed undesirable, every moment was shaped by exclusion. And it didn't begin with camps. It began with ordinary days. Jewish citizens were forced to wear yellow Star of David badges, instantly marking them in public. They were banned from parks, schools, cinemas, even sidewalks. Signs reading, "Jews not welcome," hung outside shops and restaurants. Children were bullied by teachers. Friends turned away in fear. Roma families were evicted from neighborhoods and denied work. People with disabilities were quietly taken away, and many never returned. It was called mercy killing, but it was calculated murder, disguised as policy. What made it so terrifying was how routine it became. Being spat on in the street, losing a job, hearing silence from people who once said hello. Discrimination was no longer hidden, it was law. And while this cruelty escalated into something far worse, it started with daily reminders that you didn't belong. In Nazi Germany, non-Aryans woke up each day not knowing what new right would be taken from them, or if they'd survive the next. Every single day in Nazi Germany, life was shaped by fear, obedience, and silence. What you said, wore, believed, or even thought could determine your fate. Children were molded, books were burned, and identity was erased in favor of a single, terrifying vision. It wasn't just war or genocide that defined the era. It was the quiet, relentless control over ordinary life. And in that silence, countless lives disappeared. History remembers the extremes, but it's in everyday life where the warning truly lies. What happens when the truth is outlawed and loyalty is demanded without question? To explore more untold histories, don't forget to subscribe.